by my time. I like to get started right on time because Dr. Dykes has a lot of information to cover. We You have been muted and your camera disabled, and that's deliberate so that we can save bandwidth. As all of you know, we have a tropical storm that's producing quite a bit of rain in the Corpus Christi area, and that's where Dr. Dykes is located. So anyway, if he drops off, bear with us as we try to get him reconnected through his mobile hotspot. He With that said, my name's John O'Connell. I'm a county extension agent in Brazoria County, and I've been hosting Water Wednesdays for about 3 years, maybe a little bit longer. Started them in COVID, during the COVID period. And they've been fairly popular. And so I appreciate all of you giving up your evening to join us. I do plan to have an interactive poll throughout the presentation. Um, we're all here to learn, so don't just, answer the best as you can, and then Dr. Dykes will cover those. We'll cover that information. Let's see. Well, with that said, let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Dykes. Dr. Dykes is an assistant professor in the Department of Rangeland, Wildlife, and Fisheries Management at Texas A&M University, and a wildlife specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. His research focuses on the ecology and management of large mammal species such as white-tailed deer, feral hogs, nilgai, domestic cattle, and javelina. As a researcher, he has authored numerous peer-reviewed journal articles while working in a diversity of landscapes from the southeastern United States to South Texas. His extension work includes over 75 oral presentations, popular articles, YouTube videos, podcasts, and radio broadcasts aimed at wildlife conservation and management education. Jacob received his Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Science in Wildlife and Fisheries and Aquaculture from Mississippi State University and his PhD in Wildlife Sciences from the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. He has received various awards, including an Outstanding Extension Communication Award from the Mississippi State University Extension Service and a Presenter's Award from the Southeast Deer Study Group. Jacob is an avid outdoorsman who spends his free time hunting, fishing, trapping, and camping, from elk hunting out west to fishing for redfish along the Texas coast. Jacob's passion is the outdoors, and I'm going to add that Dr. Dykes also sends us being the county agents, an email that's wildlife related, and I really appreciate getting those because it helps me with my job. All right. With that said, we're ready to go. It's all yours.
Awesome. I appreciate that introduction, John. And to sum, I guess, all of that up, I like to do cool research and then run my mouth about it. So I do appreciate y'all giving up your evening and hanging out with me. I'm going to share this. John, let me know if it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. But at this point, you should see the slideshow.
Yep, it's in a full presentation mode, so you're good to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, this is an awesome day to have a Water Wednesday. We are down here in Corpus getting tons and tons of rain and supposed to get an unbelievable amount of rain tonight. So again, if I cut out, chances are I'm going to keep talking and be frozen on y'all's end, but we'll get it figured out with enough technology. So let's kick it off. We're going to talk wildlife. And as a wildlife biologist, I can't very well talk about wildlife without talking about what it is they need. And that means everything and water, right? So this is typically where I'd be like, all right, So tell me what wildlife need. And most of y'all would probably dig back down to, second grade, third grade science, and you'd say, oh, well, they need food and they need water and they need cover. And of course, they need space. And if you remember back a long time ago, there's some fancy definitions these days, but I still go back to that second or third grade. We basically just defined habitat, right? So habitat is, an area that gives a particular critter food, water, cover, and space. In just a little bit, we're going to go through each one of those components. But one thing I want to point out here is when we start talking about these things, it's very easy to be like, okay, well, wildlife need this and wildlife need that. And one of the most important things that you can do is get rid of that word wildlife whenever you're talking habitat. And I still struggle with this all the time. I do, site visits. I ride around with the landowner and I talk about, point at that, and that's good wildlife habitat. And, oh, that's good wildlife habitat. But that's really not the way to go about it because habitat is species specific. What's good habitat for a penguin is not necessarily good habitat for a white-tailed deer or a horny toad or whatever it is we're talking about, right? They all have different needs, and that can mean anything from, the type of woody structure they need. Some critters, like, for example, turkeys, they like to roost in the top of trees. Now, those treetops, unless they're producing acorns or something, and of course they, provide cover, probably not that important to white-tailed deer, at least from the capacity of standing on those tree limbs, right? Again, white-tailed deer is a perfect example of, is bare ground important to them? Probably not. But for something like a quail or turkey, that bare ground, those areas where they can get around and scratch and look for this and that, that's really important stuff. And then also, we tend to only think about habitat during certain times of the year. For example, if you're a deer hunter, come deer season, now you're concerned with habitat. And that's because we tend to be immersed in it, right? But when you think about habitat, you think about a particular species and you need to think about what that particular species needs 365 days a year. And those needs change, and they can change drastically. Whether we're talking about nesting cover, whether we're talking about chicks have hit the ground and they're 3 inches tall and now they need to be able to navigate without tripping over a bunch of dense vegetation. They need to be able to find insects or fawning cover, different things like that. And then, of course, we know all critters, depending on what life history event they're going through, which is a fancy way of saying what are they, what kind of stuff are they dealing with? Are the does growing fawns? Are the deer putting the final touches on their antlers? All of these come with different needs, different nutritional requirements and stuff. So when you think habitat, one, species specific. When you manage for one particular species, you're probably going to benefit many others. But it's really good to keep in mind that habitat is species specific and it's an all year thing to think about. So with that said, let's go each one of those components we talked about. So we mentioned food, we mentioned water, cover, and then space. And we'll talk a little bit about that last one. That's always the one that kind of threw me for a loop. So when we're talking food, a lot of these are what I call dust lots. Y'all are gonna know all of this stuff, but it's just it's a good thing to keep reminding yourself of, right? So when we're talking herbivores, which is in most cases what we're managing for, even if you're talking livestock, we're talking wildlife today, but in most cases we're managing for herbivores, and that means they eat fruits, seeds, leaves, vegetation, growing twig tips. It's going to be what we would call vegetation, right? In some capacity. They eat mast from, acorns and persimmons and all of that kind of stuff as well. But herbivores are going to eat vegetation is what it comes down to. So if you're managing for an herbivore, then this is the food source that you would be promoting. Now, if we switch over to like carnivores, and that doesn't always mean, bears and cats and that kind of thing, we could be talking about particular bird species that you're interested in or whatever that may be. But now we're talking about meat eaters, and this can mean anything from amphibians and reptiles to small mammals to birds, whatever it may be. We're talking meat eaters at that point. So again, if you're managing for them, you'd want to make sure there's a lot of that type of resource on the landscape so they can meet their nutritional needs. And then we switch it over to omnivores, and we know they eat a little bit of both, right? So this was actually a picture I took of this Roadrunner here, and it's actually, I don't know if you could see it, but it's got two lizards in its mouth. One's pointing one direction, one's pointing the other. But I thought it was a pretty neat picture. But these critters, a coyote's a good example of one. I've seen them. Of course, they eat a lot of meat, but then they will absolutely take advantage when the grapes are falling, muscadines, all that good stuff, persimmons, they will eat them like crazy. So we also have those that will consider, those are pretty much carnivores, but on the other side of things, they sometimes will eat fruits and stuff. When you think about those really strict carnivores, we start talking about our big cats and stuff. So like I said, that's some of our dust slides there. So now let's talk water. And actually, we're not going to talk water. We know what water means, and we're going to wait until we get through this habitat thing, and we're going to dive really deep into that water. So yeah, we know that water is an essential thing that all critters must have in some capacity, and we'll talk about what I mean by that in here in just a little bit. But food, water, cover. This is a really big one that we often don't think about. For example, I mentioned the 365 days a year, where the type of cover that an animal needs when it's not nesting or fawning can be completely different than, during those times of year when a fawn needs to hide or a ground nesting bird needs to hide their eggs and stuff, right? And then one that is often forgotten is the ability of cover to offer, thermal refuge. It gets really, really hot in a lot of places. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it's hot or not, because animals are conditioned to be able to tolerate their normal settings. So even if you move up north, a summer up there is much cooler than it is down here in South Texas, but you can believe that those animals still get hot during the summer. And believe it or not, one of the most energetically taxing things that any of us, what we'll call warm-blooded animals, go through is trying to regulate that body temperature. So we think about thermal regulation, the ability to keep that, constant body temperature where it's supposed to be. And you need cover for that. One of the easiest ways to maintain body temperature is to get out of the sun, right? Get protection from that solar heat that's coming down. And now that you've seen this picture of this rabbit, you'll start seeing this summer. You'll drive by a light pole or something, and you'll notice that all the birds are lined up in the shadow. Or when you walk out of Walmart, I've got a cool picture of this actually. You walk out of Walmart, all of the seagulls, at least down here where I'm at, will be huddled up in the shadow of the F-150 sitting in the parking lot. But that's one that's often forgotten about is, the ability to get out of the sun and regulate that body temperature. But then also we think about things like predator avoidance. We don't want predators getting the eggs and stuff, but once those chicks hatch, they got to be able to get around, they got to be able to eat, and they also got to be able to hide from predators. Same thing with fawns, right? If you're familiar with the technique that fawns use to avoid predation, it's lay still, don't move, slow heartbeat. That's why a lot of people think that fawns are abandoned, because it is literally, they are conditioned to not move when you walk up to them. And mom is about 100 yards away, and she does that intentionally so that her activity doesn't bring unwanted attention from predators. And then also we're talking, roosting and bedding areas and things like that. So cover is very important, as is nutrition, as is water, which we'll dive into here in a little bit. So the space, this is the one that always threw me for a loop, right? Food, water, and cover, those all make sense. But what does that space mean? Well, honestly, it means the arrangement on the landscape of those other components that we're talking about. So if food, water, and cover is all there, but they're separated by 10 miles, then that doesn't do any critters, doesn't do them any justice, right? If the water's too far to get to and the food's too far to get to and the cover's not available, well, it doesn't matter that you could say it's all in Kingsville, Texas. Well, it doesn't matter. It's got to be attainable and available to those critters, right? And again, we're talking species specific. So for example, a white-tailed deer, they may be able to travel much farther than say quail to get to the water source or to get to the food source or to get to the cover. So that's another reason why that species specific is such an important thing to remember when we're talking habitat. When you're talking things like ground nesting birds or anything like quail, everything eats quail, right? I even eat quail. We're always after quail. They've got to have that food, water, and cover fairly close to always be protected, right? And then you got to think about things. Not only is it available in the sense that it's close enough, but is it arranged without barriers? And of course, you also got to think about things like, okay, well, I've got a water source, but if I've got a half dozen coyotes surrounding it every single night, is it really available to a white-tailed deer? So you got to think about things like that. And then, of course, there's, abiotic factors like elevation and climate and soil type and all that kind of thing that really have an effect on how these things are arranged across the landscape. So to just illustrate that a little more, you need that food, water, and cover arranged in a way that's available to whatever critter you're managing for. And in my opinion, when you're managing for any critter, the goal is to manage the habitat in a way that life is just easy. Like life is easy for that animal. The easier life is, the more resources they have, the better off they're going to be. And life's just good, right? But also that arrangement, you got to think of that connectivity. If you've got a busy highway or a high fence or predators or whatever it may be separating those animals, and believe it or not, it's not always that obvious. For example, I do a lot of work with white-tailed deer. People like to feed white-tailed deer, and they'll put up their supplemental feeders, and what they find is a couple of the dominant bucks will actually keep the does and fawns and the younger bucks away from that feeder. So yeah, that may be available at that point, but it doesn't sound like. Oh, I thought I lost y'all. John, y'all still there?
I'm still here. But yeah, you need to start sharing again.
Okay. Yeah, could see y'all on the bottom of the screen, and then it went away, which made me think that still shows I got internet here. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes. See it now.
Okay,
Need to go into full screen mode.
we
Sorry
there?
about that, folks. Yeah,
Can
you're
y'all see?
there. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so for example, what I was saying about the white-tailed deer is a lot of times your mature bucks will guard those feeders and keep your does and fawns and everything else from getting to it. So even though you've got them out and they are available, doesn't mean that they're actually able to get to them and utilize them. So sometimes that's not always obvious, right? All right. And as a biologist, I can't say any of this without making sure that everyone knows that habitat management is wildlife management. I don't care what critter we're talking about, it all comes down to habitat management. Even if you do supplemental feed, even if you do plant food plots, even if you do hunt and harvest animals, when you pull the trigger, you are having an effect on the habitat. That in turn is what is managing that animal. You're essentially creating more groceries to go around for the other critters. So habitat management is wildlife management. All right, so that's my spiel. Let's talk water, right? It's Water Wednesday. So there are three types of water. A lot of people don't know this. There are what we call free water. There is what we call preformed water, and then there's metabolic water. So free water is any of that water that is freely on the landscape. And when I say free, we're talking about ponds, streams. We're talking about something you could walk up with a cup and scoop it up. That is what we call free water. Now, when we say preformed water, that is the water that is in foods. So, for example, if you were to go take a bite of a prickly pear um, pad, you would notice there's a lot of water in it. And that's an extreme example. There is water in everything from what the carnivores are eating to what appears to be the really dry grass or livestock are eating to the forbs and stuff that deer are eating and even the insects that the quail and stuff are eating. There is water in that, and that's what we call that preformed water. And metabolic water is actually the water that is produced through the oxidation of the foods and stuff that these animals consume, even ourselves. It is a very scary cycle. You have to get into the chemistry and all of that kind of stuff. But I thought this illustration did a really good explanation of it. Regardless of what it is, if you consume it, when your body breaks it down, the byproduct of that metabolic process is some water, some H2O, right? So as we go through water, the free, the preformed, and the metabolic. So what are the daily water requirements for various critters? Well,
We're losing your audio, Dr. Dykes. Bear with us, folks. He's got some bad weather down in Corpus, so I'm going to give him a call on the cell phone and let him know that we've lost him. No problem. I've let everyone know that the weather. I've asked them to be before we work out because of the weather.
Yep, I'm back on now. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry about that. We're gonna try to get it fired up again. It's pouring down here in Corpus, so I'm kind of at the mercy of that. But let's see if we can't get it going again. All right, John, let me know what y'all see.
Right now, we see the gallery and not your slides.
Okay. Well, let's try her again then. What about now?
Right now, we have the gallery across the top, and your slides just popped up. So it's
Okay.
need to go to slide presentation mode.
Okay, let me know if that works.
Okay, you're not there yet. There you are.
Awesome. All right. Sorry about that. So what I was saying, I'm not sure what y'all were able to hear last, but basically, when it comes to water requirements, there's not a lot known. It's very, very tough, right? It depends on what that animal's going through. Of course, you could imagine when it's hotter outside, it's probably need a little more to drink, right? If you're eating more, you probably need a little more to drink. If you're a doe that's lactating and producing milk, you probably need a whole lot more to drink, right? So it's kind of tough to say on a lot of these critters. Even digging into the research, it's just not well known. What we feel about white-tailed deer is about a half to 1 gallon a day. So that we're talking daily. This is what they need. And one thing that I will point out is a lot of the critters do get the majority of their water from the foods that they eat. In fact, a lot of these critters that are adapted to live in these arid environments, these desert type critters, sometimes there's some that are believed to not ever have to take a sip of water because they literally meet all of their water requirements and are so good at conserving water that they're able to meet those requirements through the food that they eat. So really impressive adaptation for a lot of these arid evolved animals and stuff. But with that said, I found some research actually that was talking about Japanese quail, at least not Bob White or anything like that. But Japanese quail, they found that about 2 to 5 ounces. They actually measured their daily consumption of water. And if I had to guess, this was probably more on the captive side of things, which typically comes with less stress, less running from predators, that kind of thing. But they found about 2 to 5 ounces a day. And then kind of the same idea for turkey. I found that maybe about a quarter gallon a day. So really just depends. It's hard to tell. Um, the avenue that I go is we all need water. You got to have it. It's an essential nutrient. So if we can do our due diligence to make sure it's always available, they'll drink as much as they need, right? So that comes back to that habitat management. And, I think I covered this here in a little bit, but if you think about all the reasons why they need to have water, it's not just, okay, we got to stay hydrated. It's also to thermoregulate. It's also to aid in digestion. All of your metabolic functions require water. It's very easy to just think, oh, well, you'll die because, you need water, right? Well, all of the functions in the body that take place require water. So it's a very, very important thing to have, of course, right? So, recommended water distribution. This is where it gets back to, what do we recommend? How close is that available, convenient allocation of water? And it depends again on what we're talking about. So the common recommendation for, say, something like a whitetail deer, you need one water source, reliable water source per about 320 to 640 acres. And to put that in another, kind of another unit, I guess we'll say 640 acres is a square mile if you had a perfect square, right? If we're talking medium-sized mammals like foxes or something like that, probably about one per 320 acres. And then smaller mammals, squirrels, one per 80 to 160, turkey and dove. They're a little more mobile, of course. So, 320 to 640 again. And then quail and songbirds, about one per 80 acres. Of course, water is essential, so these animals will move for it, but you got to think about all the things they're going through as they try to get to this water source, right? First, can they even get to it? Is it doable? Second, can we avoid getting eaten on the way to the water source? And then, of course, hey, once we get there, is there going to be enough to go around? Or are we competing for everything? So just some things to consider there, and some typical recommendations that we throw out. So I want to tell you a little bit about a cool case study. So one of my students actually collected this data, I think about 10 years ago now, but we're actually going through some of it now. And it basically, the premise of the project was they wanted to look at the diversity of wildlife that use these free water sources in Big Bend. Of course, we know this is a very arid environment, so they stuck some game cameras out at these natural springs and basically just watched to see what happened. What critters were utilizing these natural springs, these free water sources, and how often, what type of critters, all that good stuff. So we're actually going to go through some of that. I think it's really fascinating. And just to give you another idea, you talk about doing cool research. Look at the study area here. Like, how beautiful is that? What a cool project to be a part of, right? Yeah. So this is Big Bend. And let's see. So game cameras were set. They had a 5-minute delay and they were motion activated. So if something walked in front of them, it'd take a picture, and it took 5 minutes to reset. And then again, if something moved at that point, it'd take another picture. Ended up keeping these out from January 2015 to October 2016. And all of these game camera pictures that you'll see here, they are all real pictures taken in the project. So pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, you'll notice we got deer here. These are Carmen whitetail deer, actually. And then we got a mountain lion here. In all, at these 3 springs, the cameras left out at that period of time, they ended up collecting about 300 or 3,200 pictures of animals. Now, I can tell you, through any research project I've ever done with game cameras, you can imagine 10 times that amount of pictures was a leaf blowing or something that was not an animal. So there a lot of pictures had to be gone through to sort these out and stuff. And I know that's this table on the right here is big and ugly, and nobody wants to look at that. But I did kind of want to show you the diversity there. I mean, we've got birds, and we've got big mammals and small mammals and carnivores and herbivores and omnivores. We've got all sorts of really cool stuff that are using these free water sources. And these are only 3 sources. So it's not like all of one kind of animal is using one and the others are using another. They're all sharing this. So as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about habitat management and providing these resources, you'll benefit the one that's your priority, but you'll also benefit a lot of other animals too, right? So here's another graph. It's not quite as ugly, but this one shows the frequency. So basically the table we just saw, this is in a graph form. So by far, the most photographed animal was a gray fox. And the different colors on those bars represent the different springs, the 3 different springs. So you can see ringtail cat. So that's a pretty cool capture there. Different squirrels and skunks, and some of these animals I've never even seen these particular subspecies of. So really cool stuff. Like the Texas antelope squirrel. I have no idea what that is, but it sounds really awesome. But yeah, all sorts of cool stuff. And I think one thing that really fascinated me with all of this is the diversity of birds and stuff. Some of our more of our predatory birds and stuff were actually in those water sources as well. Some of the interesting findings. So this kind of goes back to, things to consider when you put, and whether we're talking nutrition, food, water, whatever it may be, but some of the things that to consider is there were a lot of large birds captured at a particular site. Well, it just so happened that that particular site was much more open from above than the other sites. And that may not be as intuitive until after the fact. And it's like, well, no, duh, right? You open up the sky above it, of course the birds can fly in. And some of those areas that had more overhead cover had far fewer bird sightings. So again, if you were managing for birds, if that was something you were interested in, or say if you wanted to set something up, a water source, because you like to take photographs. Well, if you wanted birds to come in, it might be a good idea, at least some of our large birds, to keep the area above the water source open. Another really interesting thing that we saw is at the site where the most black bears were photographed, there were no deer recorded whatsoever. And again, if you think about it, of course, black bears, they're opportunistic carnivores. Typically, they'll take advantage of opportunities and stuff and aren't necessarily just chasing down full-grown white-tailed deer, but they are a predator of white-tailed deer. And why not avoid them, right? So actually at the one with the most bears, no deer, 0. Pretty interesting stuff. So one thing that I think is really important to talk about is, and I think this is probably why most of y'all are here, right? We're talking habitat management and the importance of water. Well, what can we do to make sure we got water, right? Make sure it's on the landscape, it's available, it's convenient. What can we do to promote water on our properties? This is actually a little pond I have on my property here. I was duck hunting that morning, but this is one of the only water sources on the property that does not dry up every year. And this one got really, really low this year. But the other 2, you can guarantee they're going to dry up every year. So that's something else to consider, right? Got to be reliable. So here's some popular ways and some that aren't as intuitive, right, as digging a hole, filling it with water. But things like rain gardens, these are really popular, right? So these are like artificial depressions that we've actually created to bring in water, store that water, and keep it from running off into areas that aren't going to be useful to us, right? Runoff is a big problem, especially in these arid environments. A lot of times the ground is so tough and hard and dry that water comes down and it just goes to flowing, right? That's why those flash floods and stuff happen. But this right here, these can actually be created to hold that water, allow that water to soak into the ground. And when it does, we're all familiar with the way water works, right? Water comes down, hopefully it goes into the ground, and it's eventually going to soak all the way through, and it's going to get into those aquifers, which are those big areas beneath the ground that actually hold all of our water. And we call this, groundwater recharge, right? So it's recharging that water that comes down. So what we want is to hit the ground and to hold it, allow it to penetrate the ground. And this is a great way to do it. These rain gardens, these artificial depressions. You can also plant different plant species and stuff that are good at holding water, good at holding that ground together, preventing that erosion, stuff like that. Farm ponds. I really didn't know much to say about this one. I think this is one of the obvious ones, right? But we all have them on our property, and we all have at least some that dry up every year, right? So, one thing I want to harp on as we go through this, and I get calls about it all the time, those reliable water sources aren't always reliable. There's going to come a time that they dry up, right? Something's going to go wrong. I had a landowner call me not long ago, and he was telling me that the turkeys have just disappeared on his property. And the part of the river or creek that runs through his property had gone dry, bone dry. It had never gone dry in 20 years, and now it's dry. And he's got critters vacating his property because of it. So just something else to consider is what may be reliable isn't always reliable, which is another reason to have some of these maybe artificial water sources, or to keep your ponds dug out, or keep erosion from happening. Make sure water's collecting where it'll stay on the property and not run off, right? Another thing is that riparian zone protection. So any of those areas any of those, say, creeks and rivers and lakes and streams and all of that good stuff, you notice when you walk up to those areas, they are so much more productive than other areas. They tend to have taller trees and more vegetation and more diversity of vegetation. They tend to be greener. And that's because those riparian areas are very, very important. And the best thing that you can do is leave them alone. If you've got a field and it's got a creek running through it, leave it alone. Keep a buffer, 100-yard buffer, a 50-yard buffer, whatever it may be, leave those areas alone. The worst thing you can do is get to mixing around in there and messing things up. And as soon as you lose some of that vegetation, as soon as you change that plant community, you start seeing erosion, you start seeing all of these other issues that come along. So these riparian areas are very, very important. And oftentimes, all you got to do is leave them alone. Just let nature do its thing. Just leave it alone. Protect those areas. Keep a buffer so that those things are protective. Because as long as these things are running like they should and something else doesn't cause a problem, a lot of times those water sources will be more reliable than, say, the old farm pond or something like that. Another thing we can do is be more efficient in the way that we landscape. I think this is another one of those duh type things, but this comes down to maintaining your irrigation system. Do you have a leaky line? Do you have, on my property here, we've got lines running all over under the ground, pipes everywhere, right? They're feeding this water trough or that water trough, or we've got one for the chickens. And they're just everywhere. We got spigots all over the place, but all it takes is that one pipe or whatever it may be that can cause issues there. So one thing you can do is make sure that your sprinklers and stuff, and even if this is sprinklers in your front yard, make sure those things are taken care of, that they're working as they should. You're just wanting to be a little more efficient with the amount of water that you're using, because believe it or not, it's going somewhere. You're right. If you're wasting it, unfortunately, it's going somewhere. You also can design your landscape to where it, again, kind of like that rain garden we talked about, it holds that water. So once the rain comes, it'll actually keep that water from running off. It'll benefit the plants and things like that, and actually hold onto your property. And again, the ideal thing is it's going to continue to soak through the ground and actually get down into that aquifer and recharge that. So with the design, I'm not a landscape professional. I'm not a landscape engineer or anything like that. I guess architect is what I was looking for. But there's simple things that you can do, right? You can consider the different types of bedding, the types of turf grass, the types of hardscapes, which, for example, like the rocks and the gravel and that kind of thing. And the rule of thirds is kind of, I'm going to butcher this, but it's basically considering that, hey, you want a third of it needs good bedding. It's going to benefit you. Your goal to conserve and hold water. Types of turf grass that'll actually hold maybe deeper roots, things like that, that'll bring that water in and hold it. And then your hardscapes and stuff that'll let that water filter in and direct it where it needs to go. But just different ways you can maybe alter the way you're doing things on your property to basically conserve water, hold it. Habitat restoration. This is a big one. And as a biologist, of course, this is the one that I preach more often than anything. And this doesn't have to be anything fancy. A lot of people ask me, well, how do I restore my habitat? It's been a hayfield, or it's been have cattle on it. I'm going to get them off of it. I want to restore it. Well, a lot of times all it means is maybe getting in there and taking a disc, maybe killing some of the undesirable vegetation, but getting a disc in there, maybe bringing up some of that native seed stock that's always in the ground, dormant, ready to go. It just needs a little bit of a push to get going. But there's a reason that we call it native plants. That's because they've evolved to live in those particular areas under those particular circumstances. The amount of rainfall, the heat, all of those different things, they're native because they've evolved to tolerate that situation and not only tolerate but thrive. So I don't know if y'all have ever seen, I should have thrown it up here, but have you ever seen cool picture of comparing the length of roots on some of our native stuff versus some of our, invasive or brought in stuff? So a lot of these native things will have roots that go feet and feet and feet into the ground, which allows them to dig down and get that water that may be a little bit lower, which allows them to thrive in these arid environments, right? So a lot of times, if you can get things back to where they should be or are supposed to be, and then get out of the way, it's better for not only the critters but also for water conservation and holding water and all of that kind of stuff. Let's see, water guzzlers. So this one's pretty cool. These have been used for decades, and essentially they're just different gadgets or ways to collect, conserve, and offer water to wildlife. And we're going to go through pictures of all sorts of them, but some of them are just genius in the way they're developed. But kind of things that you want to do here. If you want to conserve water, then you have to consider things like evaporation, right? So if you were to put a bowl of water out in the driveway completely uncovered, it's going to evaporate much quicker than, say, if you were to put something over the top of it. Right? So just simple things like that will actually help minimize water loss. Hence, now you're conserving water. And then again, the name of the game is to make sure it's available for wildlife. So for example, here we've got this large roof, so it's going to collect a lot of rain that comes down, even the dew and things like that. It's going to put it into that gutter there, and it's going to push it down into that tank. And I don't know if you can tell, but that tank is actually going to feed that red in the ground water there. It's a water bowl essentially, and will just keep it refilled as as more and more water comes. Now these aren't foolproof. It's got to rain, right? There's got to be a source of water at some point. But the name of the game again, try to conserve it, try to make it available, right? Collect it, conserve, make it available. Here's another example. So I put these two pictures together because well, it was out of picture in the first one, but this big concrete deal here is going to collect any water that comes down, and it's going to push it all into that underground tunnel there, and it's going to present itself in this little trough here. So again, we've got some genius way to collect in a large area, collect any water that comes down and make it available for wildlife. And once critters know this is here, they'll come back to it, and they'll come back to it, and they'll come back to it, right? If it's a reliable water source, they'll absolutely use it. Here's another example. This is a much smaller one. One thing that you need to remember on this stuff is it doesn't have to be fancy, right? So again, we've got a large surface area we call a roof here, and it's collecting water. It's pushing that water down into the tank here, and that tank is feeding that water bowl right there. And then a lot of times, because of the water pressure, it's not just going to keep overflowing that water bowl, right? They'll drink it down and then more will come out, that kind of thing. So conserving that water. You can even buy this type of stuff. So what we've shown so far, I'm sure you can purchase them, but you notice that some of that, there's a tank and a roof and a hose, and you can tell a lot of it, has been put together. But you can actually buy these type of things like this one right here that's already put together. Just put it out on your property. Again, we've got a pretty large surface area there that's going to collect that water, and it's going to let that water fill up, and whatever critters know it's there are going to use it if they need it. And then here's some really cool ways. You can get as creative as you want to with these things, but these are actually both of them are actually tractor discs. So, disc off of your plows and stuff like that. And they just created, again, ways to slowly create water, offer water for these critters. And a lot of these, again, will have a larger tank and a hose that will actually trickle that water out to keep whatever it may be you're using as a reservoir full for critters when they come. And as you can imagine, it's going to be a really hot spot for birds and things like that. I had a conversation, actually saw a presentation from a professional photographer the other day, and he actually sets up these outdoor studios. And by outdoor studio, it's this kind of stuff right here. So he'll actually create a free water source, and he'll create particular perching areas so that he can get good photos and stuff. And the name of the game for him is water. All critters need it. If you want to attract something, get a good picture of it, then have a water source, right? Here's another one. You'll notice, again, pretty much they follow large surface area to collect, something to store it, and then something to make it available to an animal, right? So this one right here it's a different one, but it's pretty much the same as two or three of them we've looked at this point. And another thing is, again, you don't have to spend a lot of money to do this. This looks like an old recycled 55-gallon drum, got a water hose on it, spigot, some old tin. Doesn't have to be too complicated, right? Here's another one, a bigger one. So this is a sure enough unit, right? You got a large surface area, the gutter, big tanks to keep it, and you can see how it flows here. And one thing I'll point out here is you'll notice the trough or the float on the trough is actually protected. So that's another thing to consider, right? So say if you're talking things like this one that's in the picture, maybe you want to keep your coons who are super smart and always wanting to fidget with something from being able to mess up your piping and your float and stuff. So you can put little things like this to keep those safe from critters messing with them. Another thing you'll often see, if you've ever seen some of those big troughs and tanks and stuff, they'll every now and then an animal will get in it and not be able to get out. And that's a problem, right? We don't want that. We don't want to find, fawns floating in our water tanks and troughs and stuff. So you can build ladders and stuff coming out of it. I don't have a picture of one, but you can build, ladders and different ways for critters to be able to climb out of it. Just something else that maybe isn't as intuitive, but is an important consideration, right? Even if you throw an old log over it, it's propped up against the side, raccoons and stuff get in there, fall in, they can climb out, have the ability to get on out of there. Here's another one. This looks like a pretty professional unit. One thing I want to point out here is anytime you've got these guzzlers that are making sounds, whether that's trickling water, whether that's running water consistently, that sound is going to attract wildlife. So if that's what you're trying to do and you want them to know it's there, believe me, when you go back to your primitive side and you need water, you're going to be listening for it. So anytime they can hear it, whether that's a subtle drip or a stream, whatever it may be, they're listening for it. So that's actually another way to attract critters to the water source. Once they find it, they know it's there, they'll absolutely utilize it. Just another example, like I said, we're going to show a bunch of these different guzzlers because I think that they're just genius in the way that some of the people have built them. This one, it's actually taking advantage of the roof. They've built off of the roof gutter on the house or the whatever building this is. They're collecting it. And again, in this situation, they've actually set up an artificial rock here. That wasn't there. They set this up and they've actually got the guzzler that's actually dripping water into it. So steady source of water at all times. It's not just running out on the ground everywhere, right? It's being conserved. And then again, you can get as simple as you want to with these things, right? Collect rainwater. And it doesn't have to be that these things are automatically feeding into some water trough for animals to use. You can collect rainwater and then use it yourself. Like this right here is a water hose with a valve on it. You can open it up. You can refill your bird feeders. You can do whatever you need to do. But again, the name of the game when it comes to making water or being more efficient with water is taking advantage of any water sources you have, conserving those, and then again, making them available for wildlife if that is your goal. So bird baths, all of that kind of stuff. If you do utilize any of those things, it's important to keep them clean. You don't want to, accidentally be, I've got a reliable water source, this water pan that I hadn't washed in 10 years, and it's had everything from feral cats and pigs and everything else wallowing in it. There's all sorts of issues with disease transmission, that kind of thing. And even with your bird baths, it's always good to clean those out and stuff like that. So periodically, just to make sure you're providing clean water. Again, we're trying to make life easy, right? Convenient. We want fat and happy animals, critters running around. So a little bit of a recap. Water is needed for normal metabolic function. So of course we all need water. We know we need water. We get thirsty, we drink it. We don't want to become dehydrated. But there's actually a lot more chemistry and just all sorts of different processes. Every metabolic function in the body requires water to work. Also, we're thinking waste excretion. We're thinking about getting those other nutrients and stuff deposited throughout the body. All of this requires water. And then there are three types of water. The free water, like I said, so think of your ponds, your streams, your lakes, rivers, that kind of thing. If you could go scoop a cup of it, that's your free water, right? Your preformed water is something that it's the water in what you're eating. So actually taking a bite out of a prickly pear pad, you know there's lots of water in it, right? Eating a cucumber, whatever it may be, you can tell there's lots of water in those food sources. And then metabolic water, that's that scary chemistry. Whenever you eat something, there's an oxidation process, and water is actually produced within the body. And again, I'll point out a lot of critters actually meet all of their water requirements through that preformed water, through the vegetation that they eat, which is pretty impressive. And in fact, some animals are believed to not ever have to take a sip of water. So especially those, most we're talking those desert adapted species and stuff. But the name of the game with any habitat management is make sure that these resources that they need is conveniently interspersed throughout the property. You don't want your water a mile that way, your cover a mile that way, any kind of that thing, right? So we want life to be very convenient. So make sure you're interspersing these resources throughout the property. And remember that those reliable water sources aren't always reliable. Every year, unfortunately, someone finds out that that river that never dries up, that pond that never dries up, well, it did. I get that call all of the time, unfortunately. And at that point, it's a little too late, right? Jump into action, but you kind of want to make sure you don't run into that situation, because now you got critters that are seeking refuge elsewhere, or, under stress because water's hard to find. And if you think about it, during the drought years, when those water sources do dry up, those are also the times when the vegetation that those animals, if available, probably doesn't have a lot of water content either. So it's kind of the worst of the worst there in those situations. So we want to make sure we've got water. And it's one of the easiest things to offer on the landscape too. So with that, I'd love to have a conversation. This is my contact info. If you want to jot that down, if you ever got questions or want to chat with me about anything, feel free to reach out. And then at this point, I'll hang around as long as y'all want to chat. If y'all got any questions or comments or anything like that, I'd love to talk. So thank y'all.
All right. I'm going to go through and allow microphones to folks if you have questions of Dr. Dykes. Also, he's just not talking. So, I mean, you may have to mute yourself if once I allow the microphone for you. Hopefully it's going to work. If not, you can ask your question in the Q&A box or the chat. Let's see. So one of the questions, I was curious about the water stations. Any tips for mosquito management?
Yeah, that's actually something I did come across, and I can't off the top of my mind remember if there was any way that they recommended to address that. Um, I can go ahead and tell you that absolutely, when the mosquito hatches happen and you've got a water source, if that's where they took up home, that's it's going to be a problem. I do think that there are some different things that you can do and buy that makes those water sources less desirable for mosquitoes. Another thing you could do, I always preach, holistic habitat management, in that if you're managing the habitat to attract different birds and a diversity of that kind of stuff, then they'll help keep down those mosquitoes, bats, things like that as well. But yeah, mosquitoes can be a tough one when it comes to creating these water sources, especially if you're doing it in the yard. So I know that's not a good answer. I could probably dig up some more information for you. If you want to shoot me an email, I'd be glad to.
Someone suggested using those mosquito dunks, which is bacteria. I'm drawing a blank on the bacteria they use. in it.
Yeah, that was the only thing that I came across, and I don't know enough about them to just to recommend them outright. I'm not familiar with them. I haven't used them myself, but that was the only thing that I come across that people were recommending. But again, I would need to look into it before it was something I recommended.
Let's see. Yeah, it's Bacillus thuringiensis, the genus and species of the bacteria.
Okay, cool.
Um, I think they're safe. I use them at my house, and I think they attack the larval form of the mosquito larvae.
I'll definitely have to look into them then.
Folks, I've unmuted all of you, but I've given you rights to your microphone, so you may have to unmute yourself on your side. I've never done this before, so try that out and see if you can actually get your mic if you have a question you'd like to ask.
So I see Glenn's question here. It's in the chat. He says,
Uh-huh.
or they say, are there any thoughts on creating artificial riparian features like pumping water from far pond and creating contours to direct water back to a collection area? Goal is to improve access to a more diverse group of wildlife. Yeah, I think that kind of resembles what we were talking about with those rain gardens, right? If you can make it as natural as possible, that's the best thing, right? We're looking for vegetation diversity. We're thinking about ways to conserve that water. So I think that'd be a great idea. One thing I do want to say with any of this, you probably want to make sure that you're not breaking any local regulations and that kind of thing by artificially moving water. I don't see any reason why moving it from a farm pond to kind of what you're talking about building would be an issue, but pulling water from natural sources can absolutely get you in trouble. And so you'd want to make sure to look into that. But yeah, I think your question goes to kind of what we were talking about, those rain gardens. You can make those as natural as you want to, right? With the idea of getting those areas where they're a little bit of a depression, they've got the vegetation and the infrastructure to hold water. And then, of course, as natural as it can be, probably going to attract a lot of cool critters with it.
So I'd put a question in the chat box, going back to the study out at Big Bend.
Okay.
The were there any reptiles captured?
I don't think that was one thing that I thought was really interesting as well. I don't think that there were any reptiles on pictures. Now, that could be because it would probably be very tough for any of those up there, lizards and stuff, to trigger the camera. So I would be willing to bet my paycheck that they absolutely did utilize those water sources, but probably just weren't able to trigger the cameras. And there's no telling what else we missed that didn't trigger the camera, right?
Right.
So absolutely benefit reptiles.
Okay, let's see. John's asking, how does the amount of water flow get managed with the 50-gallon barrel and a water hose into a bowl? I'm wondering about with or without pumps.
Well, it's so all of those that I showed were gravity fed. And some of those I could tell, and those aren't my personal guzzlers or anything, but I could tell that some of those had valves, and I don't know, some may have trickle valves, just different things like that to regulate the amount of water. If I had to guess, some of those appeared that they used pressure. So, for example, for example, I've got some artificial waterers for my chickens, and until they drink it down to a certain level, it will not refill that bowl that they have access to. So I think a lot of it goes into that. I can also provide y'all with resources that some of the AgriLife people have put together that can actually tell you the blueprint on how to build some of these things.
Yeah, and actually, let's see, I'm going to have to figure out how to do that. I will email those publications you sent me out.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome.
And I'm going to also put some in the chat. I'm going to post some of those links that you sent me as well. So that way folks can have them and do a little more research on them. I thought there was a
Absolutely.
way for me to add a file to the chat, but I think that's could be, yeah, there's an attached file. So I may try that. Let me know if y'all are able to open this publication. 1 second.
Yeah, and some of those publications that John are going to share with you, they literally have the blueprint and the construction, essentially a construction manual on how to build some of these things. And again, you can make them as big and fancy or as as simple as you want to make them. But yeah, my mind often goes to the ones I have for the chickens. They're gravity fed, but they use pressure. So unless enough has been removed out of that bowl, the rest of the big tank does not deposit any more water in there. And of course, if you think about it, when they're stored in those tanks, one, you're minimizing, uh, the ability of heat and light to get to it, which we're minimizing evaporation. Again, we're trying to catch it, store it, and conserve it, and then make it available. So all sorts of cool ways to do it.
Okay, so thanks, Kathy. I will have to email those publications out to you either tonight or tomorrow.
And y'all don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll keep digging to see if I can find any more. I'm actually working with the student that was working on that project that I told you about. We're actually putting another one together that's going to kind of cover all of the different ways that you can make water available to wildlife, and using her study as a case study of what you can accomplish. The diversity of wildlife you can attract, and all sorts of cool stuff like that. So I hope that'll be out later this year too.
Let me drop your email address into the in the chat. So that's Dr. Dykes' email address, and then I'm gonna drop those links into the chat as well. Also, if you have questions outside of what Dr. Dykes has presented today, feel free to ask those questions too. I saw a news blurb that Texas Parks and Wildlife Department has approved carcass disposal. I guess that's in relation to the chronic wasting disease, but I didn't read the article.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet. I work really closely together with them, but I'm not sure what those new restrictions and that type of thing. I'm not sure exactly what they mean at this point. The whole idea of that, right, is chronic wasting disease. We know that it's can be easily spread through carcasses. If you take an animal from here that's positive and you take it somewhere else and you throw that on your property, you may have just released those diseased prions into your property now. So one thing we're trying to do there is tell people the importance of, hey, if you were to harvest an animal on your property, it's best to always dispose of that carcass on your property as well, and aside from taking it down the road and throwing it out and that kind of thing. So I haven't read the article yet either. I know that just came out, but that's kind of the idea behind it. We just don't want to be moving stuff around if we don't have to.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll field. I mean, if I can't answer the question, I'll sure enough try to point you in the right direction. But anything, typically what I'm doing, if it's got hooves and it's wild, and even cattle every now and then, I'm typically doing research with it, and then trying to figure out ways we can improve the way we manage wildlife and habitat. So I'm also preaching habitat all the time. So if you got any questions, I'm always up for trying to answer them.
I'm just dropping these links that you sent me into the chat.
Great. Yeah, and that we've got probably tons more too. So if you're looking for something in particular, there's a chance that somebody in AgriLife over the years has covered it.
So at the Caesar Kleberg Center, they do a lot of research. I guess on the King Ranch, a lot of wildlife research. Is that primarily what they do?
Yeah, so Caesar Clayburg, so that's actually where I went to school. That's where all my mentors and stuff are as well. I really work closely with those folks. They're doing amazing stuff all over South Texas and beyond at this point. But yeah, they're wildlife research. If you can name the critter, they're doing something cool with it to try to improve the way that again we're managing for them, right? Conservation. So yeah, they got all sorts of cool stuff. They've done a lot of work with the East Foundation ranches. They're a great partner of ours. King Ranch, of course, and then lots and lots of private landowners in South Texas and beyond have really jumped in and helped us all, me included, even though I'm not there anymore. But yeah, A&M, Caesar Clayburg Wildlife Research Institute, yeah, we're all doing pretty cool stuff.
All
And of
right.
course, they're my neighbors down here in South Texas. They're actually in Kingsville, so they're
Right.
right down the road from me.
Yeah, we had at the State Master Naturalist Conference, and you may be aware of this. We went out to the Eastland Foundation's property by Port Mansfield.
Yeah, I actually was there
Oh, were you?
I was there. I talked at the Master Naturalist, and y'all were actually going the next day to the East Foundation. I wasn't able to
Okay.
go on that trip, but it sounded like y'all had several hundred folks and had a good old time out there.
Yeah, we had a big group of people, and
Awesome.
it's an awesome piece of property, and they're doing great uh, research. And of course, I mean, we know, or I know Dr. Wilkins,
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. East Foundation's
back before
great.
he left.
Yeah, they're a great organization. They're all about education and conservation. So I consider them really close partners of mine and friends, of course.
Folks, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the box. If not, we'll call this a done deal and let y'all uh, get on about your evening and give Jacob a chance to. I guess you'll have to drive home through some rain.
No,
Uh,
I'm at home. Our office is
okay,
closed, so everything down here is pretty much closed up. So they canceled the schools and all that kind of stuff. So and the office was closed today too. So I'm coming to you from the farm. We're getting
okay,
plenty of rain. I'm looking out the
and
window now. So
I did not thank you, or I want to thank you because I know that the A&M shut down for the Juneteenth federal holiday. So you're probably working on your day off, but I sincerely appreciate that. And I wasn't thinking when I arranged it. But anyway, I appreciate you giving up your evening with us and presenting us with this great information. I think we have people from all over the state that have joined us. So I can share locations with you if you want, but I will follow up and get these publications sent out to everyone so they'll have those resources. They're in PDF format, so anyone should be able to open them and use them. But I'm hoping you'll take this information and share it with folks and provide water for wildlife. We just happen to be in a very wet time of the summer, but
yeah,
we all know that it can be very, very dry.
absolutely. Well, John, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate all of y'all coming. I love to hang out with good folks and talk about this kind of stuff. So thank y'all very much, and thanks for sticking with me and not cutting out when the internet dropped. So thank y'all.
You're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Thank y'all.
Awesome.